Wichita's time as a wild cowtown in the 1870s had long been over. Stories of rowdy Joe Low, Redbeard, and gunfights in the streets were now just part of its history. Wichita was growing as a center of agriculture. According to the 1890 census, Wichita had a population of 23,853 people, making it the third largest city in Kansas. But beginning in January of 1893 and lasting through 1894, the attention of Wichita citizens would be captured by something odd. People began to see ghosts, their experiences published in the local newspapers. Many of these ghost stories would be debunked, others remained a mystery. Why did this happen, and why these 2 years? Let's explore the Wichita ghost craze of 1893 and 1894. The first ghost story I found, and the one that probably started the ghost craze in Wichita, was published in the Wichita Daily Eagle on January 20th, 1893. The title reads, "A Genuine Ghost Story. A house in the south part of town afflicted with a spook. She is dressed in white and has a child who prays, while the mother ghost unlocks doors and cuts up all kinds of capers." A reporter for the Eagle newspaper visited a house located on Palisade Avenue to investigate claims of it being haunted. The house had a reputation of being haunted for the past 3 years, and many tenants had left after experiencing strange events. The reporter met the Burns family, the latest occupants of the house, who were eating supper. An old blind man volunteered to talk to the reporter, saying, "Yes, there is something mighty queer about this house. Some dark deed must have been committed here. Follow me, and I think I can show you the cause of all the mysterious things that we experience here." The blind man handed a lamp to the reporter, and then proceeded to the bathroom, where he removed some boards in the floor. It led to a crawl space between the ground and the floor of the house. Finally, they reached what the blind man was referring to. "Here it is," said the old man at last, as he felt the ground with his hands. "You see, it is about 6 feet long and 2 feet wide, and if it isn't a grave, I don't know what a grave is." The Eagle man examined it closely, and it certainly seemed like a grave of a full-grown person. "Yes, sir," said the old man, continuing, "I have no doubt that a murder has been committed here, and I would like to see some digging done." They returned to the kitchen, where the reporter learned more about the haunting. When the Burns family first moved in, they noticed the windows rattling. Then all the doors in the house would be half open in the morning, even though they were locked the night before. They tried to nail the front door shut, but it would still be found open. The old man put a big wooden brace against the front door, but as soon as he turned his back, the brace fell on the floor and the door opened. The family heard footsteps and felt hands on them while in bed. The renters of the house before the Burns family, Mr. and Mrs. Garrison, experienced much of the same and moved out. When the house was empty after the Garrisons had left, a neighbor had seen a little girl through the north window, praying before she vanished. A few days later, the same neighbor saw a young lady through the window. The lady was dressed in a white robe and wore a hat covered with flowers. Their eyes eventually met, and the lady retreated and then vanished. Another neighbor, Mr. Kennedy, said he would substantiate the statements of the Burns family. The rumor going around was that there had been 2 suicides committed in the house by 2 young ladies, but the Burns family knew nothing about it. The same day the article about the haunted house was published, several people visited the haunted house on Palisade Avenue, where they found everything there as represented in the Eagle newspaper. Those who went there unbelievers in ghosts returned halfway believing in the theory of spiritualism. Yank Owens will sleep in the house tonight for the purpose of going through a personal experience, but it is doubtful whether the ghost will have the temerity to venture around while the major is on the premises. The ghost story of Palisade Avenue had already attracted the attention of many Wichita citizens, and they wanted answers. Besides trying to catch a ghost, the only thing they could do was examine the physical evidence available, the grave. 4 or 5 stout-hearted fellows went under the floor of the haunted house on Palisade Avenue night before last and examined the grave spoken of before in the Eagle. They dug down nearly 5 feet and found no bones or any evidences that a person had been buried there, except some boards, which seemed to be parts of a decayed coffin. What had been done with the body, if any had ever been buried there, is still a mystery. Hundreds of people have visited the house, and from the evidences they see and the statements they hear, few of them come away doubting that there is something very peculiar about the place. Within 48 hours, some investigations will be made that bid fair to solve the mystery, if there is anything in the theory held by many that the spirits of the dead walk about in this world. It was decided that on January 25th, a team of spiritualists would conduct a seance at the haunted house. The team being comprised of Mr. Smith and Mr. Purcell, who were well-known carpenters, S.M. Tucker, a justice of the peace, the Eagle reporter, a man named Kennedy, and the Burns family. The seance began at 8 p.m., with the group placing a chair in the middle of the room. They chose the younger Mr. Burns to lightly place his hand on the chair, and Mr. Smith asked if any of his friends were around. The chair tipped greatly, which surprised Mr. Burns and his family. They then placed a heavy kitchen table in the center of the room, and the group sat around, placing their hands on it. Mr. Smith asked the spirits to lift the table, but although the group felt a power in the room, the table was not lifted. The spirits were then questioned to roll the table forward or backward, which it did. The elder Mrs. Burns looked under the table as it did to make sure no trick was involved. Judge Tucker then called upon the spirits, and the table raised 6 inches into the air and then fell with great force. Judge Tucker continued asking questions, with the spirits answering. The group brought out the written alphabet, and the spirit spelled out the name F.C. Hill by pounding the table in response as they went through the alphabet. During the seance, the group was interrupted by a large group of boys who were out ghost hunting and who were making a great deal of noise. They decided to move to a bedroom where they formed a circle by holding hands. During this part of the session, a dark shadow was seen moving in the center of the circle, and then a small light appeared, moving erratically, and then disappearing and reappearing. A tap was heard, and then the Eagle reporter felt an unseen hand brush back his hair. Another member felt a hand pass over his cheek, and a tap was again heard in the room. By this time, the boys who were ghost hunting became so noisy that the seance had to be ended. The story of Wichita's haunted house had begun to spread throughout Kansas. On the same day as the seance, the Jetmore Republican newspaper published, "Wichita has a haunted house, and the Eagle has a reporter who is brave enough to enter it." On January 27th, the Mulvane Record published, "Wichita is enjoying a haunted house scare." Soon, an article, originally published by the Atchison Champion newspaper, began to be shared across Kansas. Wichita's ghost. Will the ambition of Wichita ever be satisfied? It furnished Kansas with a governor and the great female orator, and now it has a real haunted house and a genuine ghost. The domicile had been abandoned by several reputable families who declared that the ghost opened doors and windows, upset the furniture, threw the occupants out of bed, and all the usual antics of a genuine and orthodox ghost. The article then summarizes all that occurred at Wichita's haunted house. By February, talk of the ghost began to die down, although answers were still lacking. The Weekly Journal newspaper published on February 2nd, "Wichita has a ghost. So has Kansas City, Kansas, but the Kansas City ghost has been identified as that of the late Mr. Humphrey, while Wichita's is as yet unknown." Talk of ghosts in Wichita subsided for a while, although on September 16th, Charlie McAdams was walking home when he saw a figure running towards him. At first he thought it was a ghost, but it turned out to be a naked man streaking. The nude man ran past him and was never identified. In October, a new ghost story appeared that would entertain the people of Wichita. The headline reads, "A Small White Hand. Captain Burris has quite an interesting experience in an empty house." The events described took place on October 19th. Yesterday morning at 9 o'clock, Captain Burris was taking a quiet walk, and being a man of business and interested in property, he looked at the houses along the streets which he traversed. He came to one excellent house which he found empty, and being of an inquisitive disposition, he went in to ascertain something about its appointments. He walked slowly from one room to another until, in one of the rooms, his attention was attracted to a little closet. He leisurely walked up, caught hold of the knob, and partially opened the door, when, to his surprise, it was drawn shut again with a slam. He tried to open it again, and to his astonishment, the same thing was repeated. He concluded that there was a powerful spring somewhere, and his curiosity was aroused. He braced himself against the wall with his left hand, while with his right he made a terrible effort to open the door. One jerk opened it, but to his horror and fright, a small white hand caught hold of the knob and pulled the door back, despite his efforts to hold it. It was a lady's hand, but there was no lady visible, and Mr. Burris's hair raised on his head as straight as the quills of the most angry porcupine that ever lived. Cold chills went chasing each other along the spinal column, and still he didn't believe in ghosts. He was determined to solve the mystery, and he stood by that closet and watched the street with the eye of a hawk, determined to call the first man that passed to his assistance. In about 20 minutes, a man appeared on the sidewalk, and Mr. Burris called him in. He told him the story and asked him to try whether he could open the closet door. To his surprise, the man called his attention to the fact that the closet door was open. Mr. Burris was more astonished than ever when he found the closet was too small to contain any living being larger than a mere child. He was still more surprised to find that there was no possible exit from it, except through the door over which he had kept watch all the time. The two men stood on the threshold of the room door, talking about the strange affair, when a little boy with a bundle of school books came along. When the boy arrived in front of the house, he came to a sudden standstill, as if something in the house attracted his attention. He entered the yard and went straight up to the door, when he started around the house to another entrance. The men asked him where he was going, and he said he was going into the house to see what that man wanted. "What man?" asked Mr. Burris. "Why, the man in the house," said the boy. The house was again searched, but no man was found. The boy said that when he was passing, he saw a man kneeling on the floor in the house, as if he was papering it, and that he beckoned to him to come in. When he arrived near the house, the man beckoned him to come around to another door, and it was there he was going when Captain Burris and the other man accosted him. Every door in the house was locked, except the doorway in which the men were standing, and it was impossible for any man to be in the building, and yet the boy was positive that there was a man in the room, and that he beckoned to him to come in. Captain Burris was more astonished than ever, and he came right downtown and took John Goodyear into his confidence. Both of them went to the house again, but no more ghosts were seen. It was learned in the neighborhood, however, that a tragedy was once enacted in which a lady lost her life, and while Captain Burris does not believe in ghosts, nevertheless, he halfway believes that the hand he saw was that of the dead woman. I could find nothing more pertaining to this ghost story. These ghost stories may have been the inspiration for a ghost party held in Wichita on Halloween evening. The event was a combination ghost party, surprise party, and wedding reception for Mr. and Mrs. Howard. On Halloween Eve, the following persons, attired as ghosts, boarded a car for College Hill to surprise Mr. and Mrs. Horace Howard, and a great surprise it was. The evening was spent in music, games, and Halloween tricks, when at a late hour the crowd departed for their several homes, wishing Mr. and Mrs. Howard a long and happy life. At the beginning of the new year, 1894, a new ghost story would capture the attention of Wichita citizens. Only instead of a haunted house, this time it was a haunted church. The new Episcopal Church in Wichita, St. John's, had been completed in July of 1893. But since the church was finally finished and put in use, weird music had been heard there every night at a most unusual hour, generally about 12:30 o'clock. The headline of the Wichita Eagle read, "Plays the organ, strange unearthly music in the Episcopal Church." After midnight, the organ is heard playing weird tunes. The keys move under invisible fingers, and the lights go out without apparent cause. The first strange incident noticed was some 9 or 10 months ago, when the Wichita Musical Club sang in the church. During one song, the lights went out 3 times, and it is a fact that each time they went out, the singers were out of tune with one another. And this was not the strangest part of the affair by any means. One of the ladies of the club never noticed that the lights had gone out at all. The lady positively asserts to this day that the lamps gave light all the time, while it is asserted with equal positiveness by the other members of the club that the lights went out 3 times. Next day, the electric light company was asked what was the matter with the lights on the night in question, and the response was that the machinery ran evenly that night, and they could not believe that the lights went out at all. Reverend Mr. Von Herlick, the pastor, was notified of the strange events that occurred there, and he made some investigations with a result that was astonishing to him. He not only heard from the others that weird music was heard in the church nightly, but he actually heard it himself one night about a week ago. He describes it as very low and mournful, and not like anything he had ever heard before. A lady living nearby heard the organ one night about midnight and opened her window to hear it more plainly, for the music was singularly beautiful. The church was lighted up brilliantly, and she thought that someone, perhaps the pastor, was practicing on the organ. The air changed in the twinkling of an eye, and the music that followed was of the most unearthly kind. All at once the lights went out, and a voice was heard singing a very mournful song, the words of which were unintelligible to the lady in question. The singing was kept up for nearly 2 hours, although there was not a spark of light visible anywhere in the church. The lady awakened her husband and called his attention to the music, but strange to relate, he could not hear a note of it, and insisted that his wife was walking in her sleep. If the organ is played by a ghost at all, it is the ghost of a musician or musicians. The fact is, the large and small organs were heard playing together one night, an incident which indicates the presence of 2 persons, whether they were of flesh or of spirit. Yesterday, when an old settler was informed of the mysterious noises at the church, he recalled the fact that a German music teacher named Mrs. Edeker lived with her daughter on that corner some years ago, that both of them disappeared mysteriously and have never been heard of since. That was nearly 20 years ago, and very few people are left who remember the circumstances. The people of Wichita would not have to wait long for the church ghosts to be debunked. Just a couple of days after the last article was published, the ghosts were explained. Catch both ghosts. Episcopal Church Musical Mystery explained. Engineer Marquis runs one of the melodious spooks down in short order, while Reverend Von Herlick soon corrals the other Tweedledee Banshee. Those 2 Episcopal Church ghosts have been caught. Engineer R.W. Marquis identified one. Reverend von Herlich is sure that the other cannot prove an alibi. It is unfortunate that the truth did not come earlier. A large crowd of devout and mystic spiritualists, and less mystic and more obstreperous investigators, besieged the beautiful church edifice at midnight, Sunday, and late last night. Trouble may result from some of their antics. The presence of ghost or human does not license vandalism. The following is a reward offered: $25 reward for the apprehension and conviction of the party or parties who broke the window in the Episcopal Church Sunday night. Now, as to the first and most melodious ghost, R.W. Marquis believes he has caught it. Mr. Marquis is chief engineer at the Citizens Electric Light Plant. The spook he has taken is not the diaphanous shade of a departed virtuoso, doomed to walk the night and press the organ keys in gliding, mournful cadences, to pour out the pangs of a condemned soul in weird cascades of minor diminuendos and spurts of harsh, protesting crescendos. In fact, this ghost has no more use for an organ than a cow has for spectacles. It has no pallid cheek, no flowing locks dabbled in blood, no long, convulsive, clutching fingers. It is merely an electrical transformer. In shape, it is square. But Engineer Marquis had better explain. The low humming succession of musical sounds, said Marquis yesterday, which some imaginative people would charge to a supernatural agent, which are heard, supposedly, in the Episcopal Church, are easily explained. On that church is a transformer, a metallic meter. On an electrical wire, there is ordinarily 1,100 volts. This voltage goes to the transformer. The transformer prevents all but 54 volts, all that is necessary to produce the necessary lights, from going beyond it into the church, but directs it on around the circuit. This creates a mournful hum with time beats, such as you can hear from a telegraph pole on a windy day. There is one provision. The transformer will not moan except when it is attached to stone or brick. Wood deadens it. But why is it heard only after midnight? That is easy. The transformer signs in the daytime, but very faintly. Now, every night, a few minutes after midnight, the resident electric circuit is shut off. This causes an increased voltage on the other circuits, and it is no surprise to me that the transformer on that stone church is audible several hundred feet away at that hour. Mr. Marquis pointed to a transformer in the plant. The music that it makes, he said, is quite unlike any other that I am familiar with. It has a certain fascination for me, has that transformer's plaintive song. You will hardly believe me, but it is true that my ear has become so practiced that I can tell almost the exact voltage, whether it is decreasing or increasing by its modulations. This is the first ghost, most assuredly. This is the spirit that people have listened to between gasps. Now the second ghost. Reverend von Herlich has chased this one into its hole. It may be that it is somewhat confused with Mr. Marquis' electrical ghoul. Now, I have heard those low, mournful sounds myself, said the reverend gentleman yesterday. I heard them again Saturday night. I investigated, and I found that those sweet sounds came from a lot of electric wires near the church. The winds turn a sharp corner and sings upon them. It is merely an aeolian harp, and it is this that gives rise to that ghost theory. The music it makes is very plaintive and sweet. The story of the sexton hearing the organ playing all by itself is explained in this way. A member of the congregation was in there playing one day when the sexton was in the basement. Before the sexton came up, the member had slipped out. This disposes of the ghosts. It is well. A great many people in the neighborhood, when this information comes to them, will, with relief, sigh like the steam valve of a locomotive under full steam blowing off. There was a large crowd of spiritualists and others hovering around the church last night until 12 o'clock. It was the same way Sunday night. Several women were present. Crowds had gathered at the Episcopal Church like they had at the haunted house on Palisade Avenue the year before. And even though this mystery was solved, ghost stories would continue in Wichita. Later in January, the guards at the county jail would joke about a new musical ghost haunting them. Sedgwick County's jail was unique. It was a rotary jail. Rotary jails were circular, with each cell being shaped like a piece of pie. There was only one entrance, making escape difficult. The entire circle would rotate using a crank. The Sedgwick County Rotary Jail was nicknamed the Human Squirrel Cage and the Lazy Susan, and was built in 1888. The jail could house up to 60 prisoners. On January 23rd, the Wichita Beacon published, "Is it a ghost? Musical sounds heard at the jail when the cells turn. We have a merry-go-around at the county jail now," said Turnkey Horner. "What sort of one?" asked the Beacon. "Well, you see," was the reply, "the prisoners have rigged up a whistle in the rotary, and every time the cages revolve, the instrument of torture plays a tune. The queer part of the affair lies in the fact that we have been unable to locate either the musician or his music box. Guess the ghosts are at work. The boys all seem to enjoy our perplexity." Even though it wasn't taken seriously, this shows that even the county prisoners were taking part in the ghost stories of Wichita. In March, some people in Wichita were still confusing electricity with hauntings. Testing the lights. The county courthouse was lit up from cellar to garret. Last night, the courthouse was lit up from cellar to garret, and many people who were passing there and lived in that vicinity thought that ghosts had taken possession of the building, or the officers had turned night into day. The fact of the matter was that electric lights had been placed all over the big building, and the electric light people were testing the working of the lights. They worked all right and proved satisfactory in every way. The next ghost story would not involve electricity. Around the night of February the 12th, a man by the name of James Dow was murdered on South 5th Street. The coroner's jury concluded that James Dow came to his death from fracture of the skull caused by a blow from a car pin. The car pin referred to was a train car coupling pin. It was suspected that Dow's roommate was the murderer. The house that James Dow was killed in began to have a reputation of being haunted in the weeks that followed his death. At midnight, during mid-April, one of the neighbors living nearby told his friends that he had seen and heard something go into the house. He said that strange sights and sounds were emanating from the house for the past several nights. As the group approached the building, they heard an unearthly yell nearby, causing them to flee. After arming themselves with rocks, they decided to go back. Once again, they heard a yell, only this time one of the ghost hunters said, "Darned if I don't think it's cats." They decided to throw rocks at the house to scare anything that might be inside. Sure enough, 2 cats crawled out of a hole and ran to the railroad tracks. The group decided to gather their loose change and go get something to drink to settle their nerves. The story was published in the Wichita Beacon with the title, "Laid a Ghost: How a Party Followed a Ghost and the Startling Result." These ghost stories were becoming a part of Wichita culture, and the younger generation was having some fun with it. In June, it was advertised, "The Young People's Chapter of St. John's Church will give a ghost social this Wednesday evening at the home of Miss Nina Rames, corner 4th Avenue and 2nd Street. Ice cream, cake, and lemonade will be served. Plenty of good music, pretty girls, and a fine time are promised." The last major ghost story in Wichita in 1894 was published in September. A ghost story, a house that is said to be haunted on South Emporia. The story is current that a vacant house south of the Goodyear Hotel on South Emporia Avenue is haunted. The house in question has been vacant for some time. The rumors at Mrs. Herrig's house, near the one said to be the abode of uncanny spooks and disembodied spirits, have noticed a lady looking over the premises at several different times within the last few few days, and yesterday she told them what her business had been. She said that she had looked over the house 3 or 4 times with a view of renting it for the winter for her family, and that each time she would almost decide to take the house when some premonition of evil held her back. A peculiar feeling came over me, she said, every time I walked through the vacant rooms and peered into closets and cellars, or lifted up trap doors that led down, I knew not where, except into a place as black as the Stygian River. Saturday, she continued, I saw the people who occupied the house last, and the story they told me of their experiences there confirmed my belief that the house was haunted. They were often disturbed in the nighttime by strange noises, as of someone moving about in the house. They would take a light and go ghost hunting. Then, after satisfying themselves that their fears were ill-founded, they would try to sleep, only to be again disturbed by repetition of the strange sounds. These people finally left because of these midnight visitations. The woman declared that she had heard the house was the scene of a murder some years ago when occupied by a colored family, and that this accounted for the place being haunted by a specter. I could find no other information concerning this haunted house. Ghost stories did not pop up for the rest of the year. However, there was still some discussion around the topic. On December 19th, it was published, a woman on the west side is complaining at the police station. She says that someone is throwing flashlights in her window at all times of the night and playing ghost on her, and she wants an officer stationed at her house to sift the matter to the bottom. And with that, the Wichita ghost stories of 1894 came to a close. So why were there so many ghost stories and so much attention paid to them in Wichita during the years 1893 and 1894? Wichita had a population around 24,000 people at the time. It was a growing city with a bright future ahead of it. So why were people obsessing over the spirits of the dead? Some of the ghost stories were debunked. Others remained unexplained. Whether or not you believe in ghosts, something odd was going on in Wichita at the time, and I think there are a few reasons why. 1. Popularity of ghost stories and spiritualism. Throughout the 1890s, the subject of ghosts, both in fiction and in news articles, was quite popular. Here are some of the headlines of articles published in 1892 in Wichita. Here are some for 1893. And even more in 1894. In the 1890s, spiritualism was quite popular. Spiritualism is a movement based on the belief that departed souls can interact with the living. The Wichita ghost stories of the haunted house on Palisade Avenue and the debunked ghost of the Episcopal Church both involved people in Wichita identifying with the spiritualist movement. 2. New technological developments. The first time electric lights were demonstrated in Wichita was on October 8, 1885. Just a couple of months later, electric lights began to become widespread through the city. In 1893 and 1894, people were still learning about the new technology. In the case of the Episcopal Church, people were used to electrical devices creating light, not noise. And in the case of the county courthouse, it was just a shock to see a building lit up for the first time. 3. Ghost stories sold newspapers. The Wichita ghost stories that appeared in newspapers combined the entertainment normally found in fiction with the local news. Each ghost story was mysterious, and if you wanted to learn more, you'd have to buy the next edition. During the Palisade Avenue ghost story, some believed that the newspaper reporter there was making a lot of it up. The Wichita Star published, "That was a very lifelike fake dished up by the Eagle reporter and labeled a ghost story." But there were no articles completely debunking the whole affair. Nobody came forward saying that they were lying or that the reporter was putting words in their mouth. Whether the reporter was exaggerating or making things up, we do not know. What we do know is that it was good for business. 4. Local entertainment. People love a good prank, and they like to unsettle others with scary stories. This infatuation with ghosts in Wichita provided a great opportunity to do both. The prisoners in the Rotary jail wanted to scare the guards, and at least one woman was a target for pranksters with a flashlight. So, why did the ghost stories in Wichita stop in 1895? Maybe because the people of Wichita had something else to focus their attention on, a possible serial killer. I've already mentioned the murder of James Dow around February the 12th, 1894, and that his murder was the inspiration for one of the ghost stories in Wichita. However, there were other murders that took place in Wichita that were similar. On August the 9th, 1894, the body of Willard Stark was discovered. He was a night watchman at the Union Depot, and he was found lying on a desk with his head bashed in by a coupling pin, the same kind of weapon used to kill James Dow. On February the 11th, 1895, Charles Matkins was found dead in his home. He died from blunt force trauma from some heavy object. Whether or not they were connected, these 3 mysterious murders became new headlines for Wichita citizens to read. The ghost stories that became popular in 1893 and 1894 were now at an end, and largely became forgotten, preserved only in old newspapers.